They say the suburbs are where you go to die, or at least where your will to live goes to die a slow, beige death by 1,000 paper cuts from HOA notices. I was beginning to suspect they were right. The only difference today was that the cause of death was shaping up to be a lot less metaphorical and a whole lot more fiery. The first sign that Tuesday was going to be special wasn't the heat, which had been pressing down on our little corner of Southern California like a sweaty thumb for a week. It wasn't even the email from my boss asking if I had bandwidth for a high-priority seal pup relocation project. No, the first sign was the smell. I was on my back patio, staring at a collection of gleaming stainless steel parts that would, according to a 112-page manual written in what I assume was IKEA-sponsored gibberish, eventually become a Grillmaster 5000 Pro. It smelled of ozone and fresh plastic. But underneath that, creeping in on the hot, dry wind, was another smell. It was the scent of pine, yes, but also something acrid and ancient, the smell of something very old and very big being turned into smoke. It was the smell of a forest getting a Viking funeral 5 miles upwind. I squinted at the hills to the east. The sky above them wasn't the usual smog-filtered blue. It was a queasy shade of orange-brown, like a Fanta spilled on a dirty rug. A plume of smoke, fat and angry, churned slowly into the atmosphere. It looked uncomfortably closer than it had an hour ago when I'd decided that assembling a grill complex enough to achieve low Earth orbit was a good use of my afternoon. My name is Alex. I'm a project manager. My job, in the simplest terms, is to solve impossible problems under ridiculous deadlines for eccentric clients. Last month, I coordinated the delivery of 3 tons of artisanal ice to a desert music festival for a DJ who wanted to build a temporary igloo. The month before that, I figured out how to get a vintage Airstream trailer to the top of a skyscraper for a movie shoot. My entire life is a series of logistical puzzles. I'm good at it. I'm paid well for it. And all I wanted in return was a quiet life in a house with a yard and a fence high enough to not see my neighbors. I got the house, I got the yard. What I didn't account for was the Eagles Crest Estates Homeowners Association. I'd traded the chaos of the city for the tyranny of the cul-de-sac, governed by a rule book thicker than my mortgage agreement, a book that dictated, among other things, the precise Pantone shade of taupe our garbage cans had to be. "Looks like it's getting worse, huh?" The voice came from over the fence. It was Frank, my next-door neighbor. Frank was a decent guy, a classic suburban dad archetype. Cargo shorts, perpetually worried expression, and an almost religious devotion to his lawn fertilizer schedule. He was currently peering over the cedar fence that separated our properties, his face a mask of well-meaning anxiety. "I wouldn't say worse, Frank," I said, trying to fit a piece labeled C7B into a slot clearly meant for F9DE. "I'd say it's more cinematically ominous." "The news is calling it the Grizzly Creek Fire," he said. His voice hushed as if the fire itself might overhear him and get ideas. "They've started issuing evacuation warnings for Northwood." Northwood was the next community over, separated from us by a wide canyon. A canyon that was currently acting as a chimney. I stopped fiddling with the grill and straightened up, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. That was close. Too close. "They said we're on advisory," Frank continued, wringing his hands. "Told us to keep the Firebreak Road clear. You know, the dirt track at the end of the cul-de-sac?" I knew it well. It was a simple, ugly gash of packed earth that ran along the edge of our subdivision, a straight shot out to the main highway. It was our emergency exit, the escape hatch designed for exactly this kind of scenario. It was also, I was about to be reminded, an aesthetic nightmare for one particular resident. Frank's face soured. "Speaking of the road, you get Brenda's latest email?" Ah, Brenda, of course. The thread that tied this whole tapestry of suburban dread together. Brenda was the president, chairwoman, and supreme overlord of the Eagle's Crest HOA. A woman who wielded her power with the unblinking certainty of a North Korean general. Her lawn, a terrifyingly uniform carpet of Emerald Majesty hybrid grass, was her life's work. Her rose bushes were her Praetorian guard. Frank pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. The subject line, in all caps, read, "Urgent, violation of community aesthetic standards." "Oh, good," I muttered. "The world is ending, but at least our visual harmony will be intact." The email was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive rage. Brenda wrote of the unacceptable levels of dust being kicked up by the hot, dry winds from the unsightly dirt path. She claimed it was coating her prize-winning petunias and upsetting the delicate pH balance of her lawn. The email ended with a chillingly vague promise. The HOA will be taking immediate measures to protect the community's landscape integrity and prevent further degradation of our shared environment. "What do you think she means by taking measures?" Frank asked, his voice trembling slightly. I looked from the angry orange sky to the sanctimonious email on Frank's phone. "I don't know, Frank," I sighed, picking up my wrench. "Probably something reasonable and proportionate, like declaring a unilateral war on the concept of wind. With Brenda, it's always a toss-up." Just then, both our phones let out a synchronized, jarring beep beep beep. It was a reverse 911 call. A calm, robotic voice delivered the news. "This is an official evacuation advisory for residents of Eagle's Crest Estates. Please be prepared to leave at a moment's notice. Gather important documents, medications, and belongings." The smoke plume on the horizon seemed to swell in response, visibly darkening. The wind gusted, carrying not just the smell of smoke, but the first faint flakes of ash, like morbid gray snow. The time for detached sarcasm was rapidly coming to an end. I looked at the pile of grill parts, then at the menacing sky. "Well," I said to no one in particular, tightening a final defiant bolt on the grill's frame. "At least if the house burns down, I won't have to figure out how to work the rotisserie." My version of a go bag was less about survival and more about preserving my sanity. I packed my laptop, a hard drive with all my work files, a confusing tangle of every charging cable I owned, and a bottle of 18-year-old single malt scotch. Because if I had to watch my house burn down from a Red Cross cot, I was going to do it with a pleasant, peaty finish. I was halfway through deciding whether my espresso machine counted as an essential belonging when I saw it. A bright white truck from Evergreen Landscaping Co. was parked at the end of our cul-de-sac, right at the mouth of the Firebreak Road. Two men in green shirts were unloading something heavy, and directing them, with the imperious hand gestures of a Roman emperor, was Brenda. I put down the scotch and walked outside. Frank was already on his lawn, looking like he was about to have an aneurysm. A couple of other neighbors were drifting out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. The scene was utterly, beautifully surreal. The sky was the color of a traffic cone. A fine layer of ash was settling on everything, and Brenda was supervising the installation of several enormous ornate stone planters directly across the entrance to our only emergency exit. I strode over, my flip-flops slapping against the asphalt. "Brenda?" She didn't turn around. She was too busy instructing one of the landscapers. "No, no, no, a little to the left. The azaleas need the morning sun, and make sure it's perfectly centered." "Brenda," I said again, louder this time. "What, in the name of all that is holy and flammable, are you doing?" She finally deigned to look at me, her face set in a mask of righteous determination. Alex, I'm executing an emergency beautification project. The dust from this path was coating my lawn. It's a clear and egregious violation of Section 8, Article 4 of the Community Charter, maintaining visual harmony. Frank scurried up beside me, wringing his hands. But Brenda, that's the fire road. The fire department's map shows this as the primary access. There's a wildfire, he squeaked. Brenda waved a dismissive hand, a diamond tennis bracelet jangling on her wrist. The fire is miles away, Franklin. A little bit of smoke is no reason to abandon our community standards. This will also have the added benefit of preventing non-resident traffic from cutting through our lovely neighborhood. I stared at her, then at the half-ton planters, then at the wall of smoke that was now actively eating the sky. The sheer, crystalline density of her stupidity was breathtaking. It was a force of nature all its own. Non-residents? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. You mean like firefighters? In a fire truck? On their way to save our beige houses from being turned into charcoal? This got her attention. She turned fully towards me, her eyes narrowing into tiny slits of indignation. The fire department can use the main entrance on Eagle's Crest Drive like everyone else. I spoke to my cousin, who is a paralegal, and she agrees that temporary road closures for landscaping purposes are well within the HOA's purview. I will not have 2 decades of careful cultivation and thousands of dollars in property value decline because of a little soot. These, she said, gesturing to her lawn as if it were the Sistine Chapel ceiling, are Emerald Majesty hybrid grass blades. They require a specific pH balance, not a coating of ash. As she spoke, the landscapers began wrestling a prefabricated section of pristine, white picket fencing into the gap between the planters. It was the kind of fence you see in commercials for antidepressants. I tried one last time. I used small words. I explained the concept of staging areas. I explained that modern fire engines are the size of small whales and can't navigate cul-de-sacs easily. I explained that in a panic, the winding main road would become a parking lot in about 5 minutes. She wasn't listening. She was admiring the fence. It was, I had to admit, a very white, very pickety fence. The decision of the HOA Architectural Review Committee, she announced, her voice ringing with finality, is final. She paused for dramatic effect. And in this emergency session, I am the chair and sole voting member. One of the landscapers pulled out a bag of quick, dry cement and started mixing it in a bucket. My window of opportunity for a reasonable solution was closing, literally, in a cloud of cement dust. Brenda turned her back on us, a final, triumphant act of dismissal. The landscapers slammed the final fence post into its hole and began pouring the wet cement around its base. It was done. The road was blocked, solidly, tastefully, idiotically. I looked at my watch. It was 2:27 p.m. I looked at the fence. I looked at the plume of smoke, which no longer looked like a plume, but like a ravenous, world-eating monster peering over the hill. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Not my temper, not my patience. No, what snapped was my entire framework for problem-solving. My brain, the calm, logistical, cost-benefit analysis part of me, took over. This was no longer a neighborly dispute. It was a critical system failure. A project plan for not dying in a fire had just been sabotaged by the client. Internal monologue. Commence project review. Problem. Critical evacuation and emergency access route is blocked by a combination of granite, azaleas, and stupidity so dense it might have its own gravitational pull. Solution A. Continue arguing with the source of the stupidity. Probability of success, 0. We have achieved peak Brenda. Time cost, high. Risk, brain aneurysm. Solution B. Manually dismantle the obstruction, get crowbars, shovels. Probability of success, low to medium. Quick dry cement is no joke. The planters weigh a ton. Time cost, medium. Time we don't have. Risk, getting a 45-minute lecture from Brenda about damaging community property while my house becomes a pile of ash. Solution C, escalate, drastically, go nuclear. Find a bigger crowbar, a much, much bigger crowbar, a flying, multi-million-dollar crowbar. I turned away without another word. A serene calm washed over me. I had a new project. I pulled out my phone. Frank, God bless his anxious heart, scurried after me. "What are you doing, Alex? Are you calling the police, the fire department?" I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb moving with purpose. "No, Frank," I said, the plan crystallizing in my mind with beautiful, terrible clarity. The police are what you call when a problem can be solved with a stern talking to and maybe a fine. I'm way past that. My thumb stopped on a name. It wasn't an official contact. It was a name that lived in my phone for emergencies of a certain, shall we say, unconventional nature. Dave, whatever, whenever, Air Services. "I'm calling a contractor," I said. I pressed the call button. I glanced at my watch. 2:28 p.m. The clock was ticking. My new project had a very aggressive deadline. "Dave, it's Alex." The voice on the other end was gravelly and laced with the distinct sound of wind whipping past a microphone. In the background, there was a faint, rhythmic chopping sound. "Alex," the voice crackled, "don't tell me you've locked yourself on another rooftop. And you still owe me for that little incident with the industrial air conditioner in Pasadena. What impossible thing do you want now?" Dave ran a bespoke charter service out of a municipal airport a few towns over. His business card just said whatever, whenever Air Services, with a phone number and a silhouette of a helicopter that looked suspiciously like a dragonfly. He mostly flew rich tourists on canyon tours, but his real specialty, and the reason his number was in my phone, was heavy lifting. Weird heavy lifting. Dave was the guy you called when you needed something moved that didn't fit on a truck and probably wasn't entirely legal to move in the first place. "I have an emergency logistics problem, Dave," I said, walking briskly back toward my house. Frank was trailing me like a nervous puppy. "I need heavy-duty, localized, high-volume fluid displacement immediately." There was a pause on the line, just long enough for the sound of the helicopter rotors to become more pronounced. "You're using your project manager voice," Dave said warily. "That's going to cost you extra. Are you trying to move a swimming pool again? Because my insurance guy, Stan, he still gets hives when he hears your name." "No, simpler than that," I said, pacing on my driveway. "I need a water drop from a helicopter." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I could hear Dave breathing. I could hear the thump, thump, thump of his rotors. I could practically hear the gears turning in his cynical, money-driven brain. "Are you starting a cult?" he finally asked. "Because if you're starting a cult, the rates are different. Hazard pay." "It's an HOA dispute," I said flatly. The second silence was even longer than the first. When he spoke again, his voice was filled with a mix of horror and grudging respect. "That's worse, much worse. Okay, what are the specs?" This was my turf. Specs, deliverables, action items. "The target is a non-reinforced decorative barrier. Mostly wood, some ornamental stone. Dimensions are approximately 10 feet wide, 4 feet high. I don't need a wide area suppression spray. I need a single, high-mass precision drop. Think of it less as firefighting and more as hydraulic demolition." "Demolition," Dave repeated slowly. "With water." "It's the only tool for the job that's available on short notice," I said. "I need it now. What have you got?" "Alex, you're a lunatic," he said, but there was a hint of professional interest in his voice now. This was a puzzle, and Dave liked puzzles, especially if they came with a paycheck. You know there's a wildfire going on, right? The Grizzly Creek fire? The FAA has a TFR, a temporary flight restriction, over that whole area. I can't just go buzzing around dropping water wherever I feel like it. He was right. It was the first major obstacle. My internal project manager kicked in. Internal monologue, risk mitigation, recontextualize the mission parameters. We're not buzzing around, Dave. This is a targeted operation on private property, well outside the current TFR boundary. And we're not firefighting. That's the key. This is emergency construction and demolition. We are rapidly clearing an unpermitted obstruction from a designated access route. See? Different department, different paperwork. Your target is well below 400 feet AGL. It's perfectly legal. I was making most of this up, but I said it with the unwavering confidence of a man holding a royal flush. You want me to file a flight plan for emergency construction? He scoffed. What do I list as the equipment? One big bucket of water? Exactly. I need something with a Bambi bucket. A big one. 2,000 gallons should provide enough kinetic force. A weary sigh traveled across the phone line. A Skycrane. You think I keep a Sikorsky S-64 Skycrane in my back pocket for suburban pissing matches? The one I have access to is currently under a very lucrative contract with CAL FIRE, fighting the actual fire, you madman. They tend to frown on you borrowing their equipment for side gigs. My heart sank. So you can't do it. I didn't say that, Dave said. I said I don't have a Skycrane. I do have a Kaman K-Max sitting on the tarmac at Hawthorne Muni. It's an ugly son of a bitch, but the intermeshing rotors give it one hell of a lift capacity. It's on standby for a bridge-setting job that got delayed. It's already fitted with a 500-gallon bucket. 1,500 gallons? Not 2,000, but... Will it be enough? I asked. Enough to turn a picket fence into toothpicks and give some petunias a very bad day? Oh yeah, it'll be enough. The final piece of the puzzle. The price. Okay, Dave. What's this particular brand of insanity going to cost me? He quoted a number that made my eyes water. It was more than my car was worth. That's the base rate, he continued smoothly. Then there's the short notice fee, the unusual cargo fee. And for this specific occasion, a brand new HOA dispute stupidity surcharge. Payable up front. I didn't even hesitate. My company had a special account for just these kinds of project expenses. It was vaguely labeled discretionary site prep and logistics, and my boss had long ago learned not to ask questions as long as the clients were happy. Done, I said. Put it on the corporate account. Project code Eagle's Crest Site Prep. You got it, Dave said. I could hear the grin in his voice. I'll need coordinates. I gave him my address, telling him to use my large, circular driveway as a visual marker for the final approach. Source the water from the reservoir by the highway. It's on your way. I need you here in 20 minutes, Dave. 20 minutes? He squawked. It takes me 10 just to do my pre-flight checks. Then you'd better be quick, I said coolly. Time is a factor. All right, I'm taking off now, he grumbled. But Alex, I swear to God, if I end up on the evening news for this, I'm telling them it was your idea. I'm just a humble pilot for hire. Wouldn't have it any other way, Dave, I said. See you in 20. I hung up the phone. I looked at my watch. 2:30 p.m. 3 minutes. 3 minutes had passed from the moment Brenda's fence became a reality to the moment its doom was taking flight. I turned to Frank. He had been listening to my half of the conversation with a look of slowly dawning, slack-jawed horror. His face was pale. A helicopter? He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. You called a helicopter to drop water on Brenda's new fence? I gave him a calm, reassuring smile. It's not Brenda's fence, Frank. It's an illegal obstruction on a vital emergency route, and I didn't call a helicopter. I called the helicopter. Now, if I were you, I'd move that minivan out of your driveway, and maybe bring in those wind chimes. It's about to get breezy. The next 19 minutes were the longest of my life. Waiting for a pizza delivery is one thing. Waiting for a $10 million piece of aerial machinery to arrive and commit an act of what could only be described as malicious landscaping is another level of anxiety altogether. The mood in the cul-de-sac had shifted from nervous apprehension to a bizarre, electric tension. The wildfire was no longer some abstract threat on the news. It was an active participant in our little suburban drama. The wind had picked up significantly, no longer a gentle breeze, but hot, angry gusts that whipped leaves and debris into swirling eddies. It carried the smell of a forest fire with an intimacy that was deeply unsettling. The sky was no longer orange. It had deepened to a bruised, sickly purple-orange, like a sunset on a dying planet. And the ash was no longer a few faint flakes. It was a steady, silent snowfall of gray, coating cars, roofs, and Brenda's precious Emerald Majesty lawn in a uniform layer of apocalyptic dust. The distant wail of sirens was a constant, mournful soundtrack. My phone call had not gone unnoticed. News of it had spread through the small cluster of neighbors like, well, wildfire. The community was split into two distinct camps. "He's going to get us all fined," hissed a woman named Margaret to her husband, clutching her small, yapping dog to her chest. "The HOA is going to put a lien on our houses." "Fined? Margaret, the hills are on fire," her husband shot back, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and giddy excitement. "I'd rather be fined than crispy. You go, Alex." He gave me a furtive thumbs up from across the street. Frank, meanwhile, was having a full-blown, low-grade panic attack. He was pacing back and forth on my lawn, running his hands through his already thinning hair. "They're going to arrest you, Alex," he muttered over and over again. "They're going to arrest you, and Brenda is going to sue us back to the Stone Age. We'll be ruined, ruined." "Relax, Frank," I said, leaning against my newly assembled and as yet unused grill. I had adopted an air of serene, almost zen-like calm. It was the same headspace I got into before a big project launch. The chaos was external. Internally, all I had was a checklist. Deep breaths, and for God's sake, stand a little further away from my driveway. Right on cue, the star of our show made her grand re-entrance. Brenda, having clearly heard the rising commotion, marched back down the street from her house. She had changed into a beige pantsuit, an outfit I could only describe as battle-ready business casual. She was holding her phone up, the red dot of the video recording icon glowing ominously. She stopped at the edge of my property line, a safe legal distance, and aimed the phone at me. "I heard you threatening to destroy HOA property, Alex," she announced, her voice projecting for all to hear. "This is a direct violation of Bylaw 12, Section 2, Coercion and Intimidation of Board Members. I am documenting this. I am reporting you to the authorities. This will not stand." I crossed my arms and regarded her with a placid smile. The patient smile of a man who knows something you don't. The smile of a man who has a K-Max helicopter on speed dial. "Brenda," I said, my voice calm and even, easily carrying over the wind. "In approximately 5 minutes." I glanced at my watch for effect. "A very large, very expensive piece of licensed and insured machinery is going to perform what the FAA will know as site clearance. You and your illegal, life-endangering fence are currently located in the middle of the designated work site. I would strongly suggest you, your prize-winning petunias, and your magnificent delusions of grandeur retreat to a safe distance, say, another state." Brenda's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. My calm, specific threat had short-circuited her brain. She had no bylaw for this. And then we heard it. It wasn't the distant sirens. It was a new sound, a sound that didn't belong in a world of manicured lawns and automatic sprinklers. It was a deep, guttural, rhythmic whump, whump, whump that started as a vibration in the soles of my feet and grew until it was a physical presence in my chest. It was the sound of a giant beating the air into submission. It got louder, closer. Everyone, every single person on that street, from fearful Margaret to giddy but terrified Frank to the now frozen Brenda, stopped and looked up at the sky. A shape appeared over the ridge of hills to the west. It wasn't a sleek news chopper or a nimble police bird. This thing was ugly, functional, and terrifyingly powerful. It was the K-Max, a bizarre, insect-like machine with two massive, intermeshing rotors spinning in opposite directions, creating a vortex that was now whipping the trees in our cul-de-sac into a frenzy. And dangling beneath it, swinging gently on a long, thick cable, was a massive, bright orange bucket. It was coming right for us. My heart swelled with a feeling of pure, unadulterated, glorious satisfaction. Internal monologue. They say you should never meet your heroes. I profoundly disagree. My hero is a 50-year-old cynic named Dave, flying a $10 million dragonfly, and he is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen in my entire life. Brenda's face has transitioned through a spectacular range of colors, from smug red to blotchy purple, and has now settled on a chalky, horrified white. She looks like a tomato that's been flash frozen. Oh yeah, this is already worth every single penny. The world dissolved into a cacophony of noise and wind. The K-Max, Dave at the controls, was a master of its violent craft. It didn't just arrive. It took possession of the airspace above our little cul-de-sac. The whump, whump, whump of its twin rotors was a deafening, chest-thumping roar that drowned out the distant sirens, the wind, everything. A powerful downdraft blasted us, kicking up a storm of leaves, loose dirt, and the thick ash that had been settling all day. It was like standing in a localized hurricane. I had to plant my feet to keep from getting knocked over. Dave was a pro. He made a slow, deliberate pass over the area. The giant orange bucket swinging like a pendulum of doom. He circled once, lining up his shot with the cool precision of a bomber pilot. I could see the glint of the sun on the cockpit glass. I imagined him in there, chewing gum, utterly unfazed. He brought the helicopter into a hover, perfectly centered over the blocked fire road, maybe 150 feet up. The noise was incredible. The wind tore at our clothes. Neighbors were cowering behind cars. Frank had fallen over and was now just lying flat on my lawn, covering his head. Brenda was the only one still standing in the open, frozen in place. Her beige pantsuit flapped wildly around her. Her phone was still in her hand, but she was no longer recording. She was just staring up, her mouth agape in utter uncomprehending disbelief. She looked like an early human encountering fire for the first time. The helicopter held its position. The bright orange Bambi bucket, brimming with 1,500 gallons of water sourced from the nearby reservoir, tilted downwards. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, gravity took over. It wasn't a spray. It wasn't a shower. It was a solid column of water, a localized tsunami, 12,500 pounds of liquid fury released from the sky. It fell, with a terrifying, rushing silence for a fraction of a second before it hit the target. The impact was not a splash. It was a concussive, explosive crump whoosh that felt like a bomb going off. I watched, mesmerized, as my ridiculously expensive, gloriously over-the-top solution met the problem. The pristine white picket fence didn't just break, it vaporized. It exploded into a cloud of what could only be described as sawdust and splinters. One moment it was there, a monument to suburban pettiness. The next, it was gone. The half-ton decorative stone planters, which the landscapers had struggled to move, were tossed aside like bath toys. They rolled end over end, digging deep, muddy craters into the edges of Brenda's Emerald Majesty lawn before coming to rest at awkward, drunken angles. A massive wave of water and mud, a brown, churning wall of liquid surged from the point of impact. It blasted down the now clear dirt road, scouring it clean. And most satisfyingly, a significant portion of the deluge washed directly over Brenda's entire front yard. Her prize-winning, meticulously curated rose bushes were flattened into the mud. Her perfect pH-balanced lawn became an instant swamp. The K-Max, its job done, didn't linger. The bucket, now empty, swung wildly for a moment. Dave gave the collective a nudge. The helicopter gained altitude with an ear-splitting roar, banked sharply, and disappeared back over the ridge from whence it came. And then silence. A shocking, profound silence, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water from saturated tree branches and the distant, ever-present wail of sirens. In the misty air hanging over the scene of destruction, a perfect, brilliant rainbow briefly formed. It was the most beautiful, vindictive rainbow I had ever seen. The firebreak road was clear, utterly, emphatically, undeniably clear. Brenda stood in the middle of it all. She was soaked to the bone. Her carefully coiffed hair was plastered to her scalp in wet clumps. Her expensive beige pantsuit was now a filthy, muddy brown. She slowly lowered her phone, her arm dropping to her side, as if the phone now weighed 1,000 pounds. Her mouth hung open. As if for a final, cinematic touch, a single, perfect pink rose petal, torn from its bush, floated down and landed gently on her shoulder. She stared at the devastation, her obliterated fence, her cratered lawn, her drowned roses. Then she let out a shriek. It was not a scream of fear. It was a sound of pure, undiluted, weaponized rage that seemed to tear from the very depths of her soul. It was the sound of a queen whose castle had just been washed away in a flood of her own making. My work was done. Project complete. The arrival of the police was almost anticlimactic. 2 black and white patrol cars, a Ford Explorer and a Charger, pulled into the cul-de-sac about 5 minutes after Dave had made his dramatic exit. They rolled up slowly, sirens off. The officers inside clearly trying to make sense of the scene. They were likely responding to Brenda's earlier, frantic 911 call about threats and intimidation. What they found was something for which no police academy could have ever prepared them. Our cul-de-sac looked like it had been the site of a miniature flash flood. Water was still draining into the storm sewers. A thick layer of mud covered Brenda's lawn. 2 massive stone planters were lying on their sides like dead rhinos. And in the middle of it all stood one fuming, muddy woman, a small group of stunned but visibly impressed neighbors, and me, calmly wiping ash off my new grill with a paper towel. Out stepped 2 officers. The first was older, with a weary, seen-it-all face and a mustache that looked like it had been disappointed since the Reagan administration. His name tag read Miller. His partner was younger, bright-eyed, and looked like he had just been handed the most confusing puzzle of his life. His tag read Schmidt. Schmidt keyed his shoulder mic, his eyes wide as he scanned the watery chaos. Dispatch, can you confirm the nature of the call for 7 Adam 12? We have, a significant amount of water, and a very angry wet lady. Miller, the veteran, ignored his partner's bewilderment. His gaze swept over the scene, lingered on the obliterated fence line, and then settled on me, the only person not looking shocked. He heaved a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of every stupid suburban dispute he'd ever had to mediate. "Okay," he said, walking towards me, his voice flat. "I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess this was you." I offered him a polite, neighborly smile. "I was simply facilitating the removal of an unpermitted traffic obstruction that was impeding emergency vehicle access in a declared wildfire advisory zone, officer," I said, my tone meticulously reasonable. All proper channels were exhausted. Brenda, who had been vibrating with rage, finally found her voice. "He tried to drown me," she shrieked, pointing a trembling, muddy finger at me. "He hired a military helicopter, a weapon of war. He used it to destroy my lawn. Arrest him! Arrest that man!" Miller held up a calming hand to her without looking away from me. Schmidt, meanwhile, was scribbling furiously in his notepad, occasionally looking up at the sky as if expecting the helicopter to return for a second pass. I, in turn, remained the picture of calm. I was back in my element. This wasn't a shouting match. It was a debrief. I had my facts in order. "Ma'am," Miller said to Brenda, "let's just all take a breath." He turned his full attention back to me. "Son, you want to walk me through what you mean by facilitating?" "Certainly, officer," I began, adopting my best "let me explain this complex situation to you" voice. "As you know, we are under an evacuation advisory. The fire department designates that dirt road," I pointed to the now pristine open path, "as a primary emergency access route. The president of our homeowners association, that woman over there," I nodded politely at Brenda, "chose this afternoon to illegally obstruct that public safety route with a fence and several large stone planters in direct violation of state fire code, and ironically, the HOA's own bylaws regarding access paths." I pulled out my phone. "I have here the official county evacuation advisory issued at 2:05 p.m. I also have the email from our HOA president sent at 2:15 p.m. stating her intent to block the road for aesthetic reasons. My attempts at verbal negotiation failed at approximately 2:27 p.m. Given the exigent circumstances and the clear and present danger posed by the wildfire, I contracted a private demolition service to clear the obstruction." Miller stared at me, his expression unreadable. "A demolition service?" "That's correct," I said smoothly. "The method they chose was a high-volume hydrokinetic impact event. Messy, I'll grant you, but incredibly efficient. The water, I assure you, was merely a byproduct of the hydraulic demolition process. The primary goal was always the clearance of the roadway." Schmidt stopped writing. "Hydrokinetic... what?" "He dropped a giant water balloon on me," Brenda screamed. Miller was now rubbing his temples, a gesture I suspected he was intimately familiar with. "So, let me get this straight," he said slowly. "To clear a fence, you hired a helicopter. To drop a bucket of water on it?" Schmidt chimed in, a note of genuine awe in his voice. "Like from Call of Duty?" "I believe so, yes," I confirmed. The legal absurdity of the situation hung in the air. Miller was a cop. He dealt with theft, DUIs, domestic disputes. There was no page in his rulebook for this. On one hand, I had, by any reasonable definition, committed a monumental act of malicious mischief. On the other hand, Brenda had knowingly and willfully blocked an emergency route during a natural disaster, a far more serious and clear-cut public safety violation. He was caught between a lunatic with a checkbook and an idiot with a rulebook. Just then, a new sound cut through the air. This one was a welcome one, the deep rumble of a diesel engine and the blare of an air horn. A massive, bright red Cal fire engine, a Type 1 model the size of a small house, came thundering up the main street. It slowed as it reached our cul-de-sac. the captain in the passenger seat leaning out, looking for the turn. His eyes scanned the street, passed over the winding suburban lane, and then locked onto the freshly scoured dirt road. He saw the path was clear. A look of relief washed over his face. He gave a quick thumbs up to Officer Miller. "Hey, thanks for getting this road open, guys," the fire captain yelled over the engine's roar. "You just saved us a 10-minute detour around the whole subdivision. We've got a crew trying to hold the line just over this ridge." Without waiting for a reply, the fire engine made the wide turn with surprising grace, its huge tires churning through the mud, and roared down the newly cleared firebreak road, heading directly towards the fight. That was it. The turning point. The ultimate validation. Officer Miller watched the fire truck go. He looked at the vital, now open road. He looked at Brenda, who stood silently, her face a mask of defeated fury. Then he looked at me, a hint of something, maybe respect, maybe just sheer exhaustion, in his eyes. He had made his decision. He walked over to Brenda. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now firm and official, "willfully obstructing the path of emergency personnel is a serious offense. I'm going to need you to come with us. We have a few questions for you down at the station." Brenda was stunned into a sputtering, indignant silence as Officer Schmidt, looking vaguely apologetic, gently guided her toward one of the patrol cars. Miller turned back to me one last time. He walked right up to me, close enough that I could see the fatigue in his eyes. He stared at me for a long moment. "Don't," he said, his voice low and dead serious. "Ever do that again." He paused, then added with a sigh, "Next time just call us first." I couldn't resist. "Where's the fun in that, officer?" A corner of his magnificent mustache twitched, almost betraying a smile. He just shook his head slowly, turned, and walked back to his car. The suburban crisis, for now, was over. The days that followed were a blur of neighborhood gossip and the slow receding of a crisis. The Grizzly Creek fire was contained a day later, its charge halted at the very ridge the fire engine had raced off to defend. The official report credited the rapid response of ground crews, but a few of us knew that their rapid response was made possible by a clear road. The evacuation advisory was lifted. The sky returned to its normal, hazy blue. The only lingering smell of smoke was from my grill. Brenda, as it turned out, was charged with willfully obstructing emergency personnel. A misdemeanor, but a serious one. The HOA was thrown into chaos. Her reign of terror was over. The board, a collection of timid yes-men she had appointed, resigned en masse via a group email. An emergency community meeting was called for the following week in the community center clubhouse. I attended out of a sense of morbid curiosity, fully expecting to be burned in effigy. I walked in, and a hush fell over the room. People stared. I braced myself for the onslaught. Instead, Frank, my nervous neighbor, stood up and started clapping. Slowly, hesitantly, a few others joined in. Then a few more. Soon, the entire room of about 50 residents was giving me a standing ovation. They had lived under Brenda's thumb for years, terrorized by fines for mismatched flower pots and grass that was a quarter-inch too high. I had, in one glorious, waterlogged afternoon, liberated them. Someone nominated me to be the new HOA president. A wave of ayes and seconded filled the room. I stood up and held up my hands. "No," I said, my voice firm. "Thank you, but absolutely not. I refuse vehemently. My work here is done." I paused, looking around the room at their expectant faces. "I have a grill to season." And so, my legend was born. I became a suburban myth, the man who fought the HOA and won. Kids would point at my house when they rode by on their bikes. Neighbors would give me a respectful, almost fearful nod when I got the mail. The story grew with each telling. In some versions, it was a B-52 bomber. In others, I had personally rappelled from the helicopter to fight Brenda in hand-to-hand combat. I did nothing to discourage these rumors. The Firebreak Road remained clear. A week after the incident, a new sign appeared at its entrance. It was a professional, official-looking metal sign. It read, "Emergency vehicle access, 24-hour clearance required." But underneath, in a smaller, stenciled font, someone had added a line, "Violators will be efficiently dealt with." No one knew who put it there. I whistled innocently whenever anyone asked. Brenda eventually pleaded no contest, paid a hefty fine, and was sentenced to community service, which, in a stroke of cosmic justice, involved cleaning up public parks. She put her house on the market a month later. The new owners, a young couple with 2 loud dogs and a distaste for lawn care, were a breath of fresh air. The story ends, as it began, on my back patio. It's a Saturday afternoon, a few weeks later. The sky is clear. The only smoke in the air is hickory, curling up from my Grillmaster 5000 Pro. I've finally mastered it. Frank is over, sitting in one of my patio chairs, a beer in his hand. "I still can't believe you did that," he says, shaking his head for the 100th time. He has a new, relaxed air about him now that Brenda is gone. I flip a perfectly seared burger. "It was a logistical problem, Frank," I say, repeating my mantra. "You identify the bottleneck, you assess your available resources, and you apply overwhelming force to the point of failure. It's just project management 101. He laughs and takes a sip of his beer. "My wife wants to know if you do birthday parties." I smile. Life is quiet again. The suburbs, it turns out, aren't so bad when you remove the tyrant. It just takes a little creative problem-solving. My phone buzzes on the patio table. I pick it up. It's a text from Dave. He's been sending me sporadic updates on his newfound minor celebrity status at the local pilot's bar. This one is just a photo. It's a screenshot of a small article from an aviation blog, headlined, "Mysterious Hydrokinetic Event, Hailed for Aiding Firefighters in SoCal Blaze." Underneath the picture, Dave has written one word, surcharge. I laugh out loud, a real, genuine laugh. I type back, "Send me the invoice." I pick up my burger, which is grilled to absolute perfection, and take a bite. The cheese is melted. The patty is juicy. It's a damn good burger. I lean back in my chair, sipping my beer, looking out at my quiet, peaceful, well-managed yard. They wanted a quiet neighbor. They got a project manager. Their mistake. Maybe the burger is just a little overdone on one side, but hey, I guess you can't solve every problem with a helicopter.